We're going to now switch over to gears. So I had asked for a lot of mailbag questions here, basically.
Is this the love line portion? Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a burn player. He plays Bogles. How do we make it work?
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Goblin Lore. This episode is the second of a two-part series where we discuss tilt and emotions in Magic the Gathering with Erin Campbell of Magic Mics. For this episode, we solicited questions from our Twitter followers to ask Erin and discuss these concepts with her as they related to playing Magic, being involved in Magic communities, in groups, and then how we can take these lessons that we learn into our own emotional processing. Erin has been an absolute delight to talk to, and she spent about 3 hours with us that day, even sitting through some of our technical difficulties of recording, and was an absolute treasure. So, without any further ado, let's get to the show.
Wouldn't that be fabulous, by the way, if there was like a Magic love line of like, I always fantasize. I'm always thinking about what my next project is going to be, and I'm always thinking, and it's like for a while there, before I started Magic Mics, before I started with them, I was like, I should do a series called like Sex in the MTG, where it'd be like, can a mid-range girl and a control guy ever make it work, and just have like, this like the single apartment and like the Magic cards in my oven, like Carrie Bradshaw, and it would be fantastic, and just.
So, no, I actually submitted mailbag questions of what people might want us to hear about, because with this topic, I knew there was going to be a lot of interest in terms of kind of what you were saying, Erin, and that's why I wanted to split this episode into two in some ways, is we've identified now all of this to do with expression of emotion, how it's not working, how there might be differences between men and women and expectations of emotion. It obviously always leads, and I feel like a lot of our discussions, not on here, but in general in life, lead to, we can identify the problem, and then there's always the question, well, now what? Mm-hmm. So I thought by soliciting some mailbag questions and me bringing in some of the stuff that I can kind of talk about in terms of expressing emotions and maybe ways that it could be done to help with either tilt. So
our first submission comes from at Kyle C. Carson. That's Cowboy Kyle
him.
On Twitter.
I got to meet him at Gen Con.
I very rarely get salty, but I could always use more advice on pulling other people at the EDH table out of a salty behavior. So what strategies could Kyle or any of our Commander players use to help people in EDH, which is a more casual and can be a more it can be a more fun and communal format sometimes than one-on-one competitive Magic. What's a way to pull somebody out of that salt mode?
So this really strikes a chord with me, because I avoided Commander for a really long time because I was not able to find groups that I really enjoyed playing with. And so I think it ultimately kind of comes up to reading the room, where I really started enjoying Commander when I started playing with like-minded groups. And so I have a really great local group that I play with every couple of weeks or so, and I know how we play, I know how we like to play, I know how we build decks, and so that impacts the decks that I bring with me when I go see them, and also it impacts the decks that I build. And so if I find that I'm joining a new group, I like to ask a couple of questions, and I bring a nice range of decks with me. I have about 5 or 6 decks, and so I kind of get a feel for like, okay, are we being really spiky today? Have you guys spent a lot of money on your decks? And then that allows me to kind of choose a deck to fit the group. And so I hate to necessarily turn it back to Kyle, because I know that he mentioned how to pull others out of it, but I think just being able to read the room and picking the right deck for the group, where, I'm thinking of building a mono white Teshar deck that I know my play group would hate. And so I know that if I'm going to play that deck, I need to not bring that to EDH on Sunday. But if I'm going to a GP and I know that I'm playing with Magrini and some of these folks who are very spiky, I know that deck can probably roll there. So I think, just really reading the room, making sure, if possible, that you can bring a nice mix of decks with you if you have the resources to do that, and just making sure that the decks you're playing kind of fall in line with the people. Get a read for what they're doing, see the kind of decks they're playing, see the way they play, and just try to fall in line with that, and kind of tailor yourself to their experience.
So that matches pretty well with my experience. I have a number of different decks. I have decks that are a little more aggressive. I don't have terribly spiky, but my Kozilek deck is pretty aggressive. Casting Kozilek on turn 3 or 4 is pretty good. But I do have a range of decks, and that's one thing that I like about our Minneapolis play group too. We have a lot of people here have what we call 1DH decks, so decks where every card is less than $1. So those tend to be a little more casual, but everyone in the group will bring both Commander and 1DH so that we can kind of change the pace of the game depending on who we're playing with, or even the same group will just say, let's do a 1DH game to break up what we're doing, to kind of mix up what's going on. And I think that could help too, is in addition to reading the room and people's predilections, there's also sometimes just doing something different with the same group can help with that too.
These are the advice I would give to people, to kind of try to ease in and having less salt. I think that, like what Kyle's talking about, I also want to address if you get into a game where somebody does have that, maybe even in your own known play group. And there is a difference between if you're playing somebody at a GP, which I've done, I just kind of finish the game out and then I'm just going to politely say that I have to go, and I'm probably not going to. And if it's happening in the middle, I might say something or just try to do it. But if it's my own play group, I think is where it becomes a little bit harder, because I've seen it, if somebody loses a bunch of games in a row, feels like they're being targeted in a game, it can feel uncomfortable. To pull somebody out of Salt or Tilt itself is very difficult to do because of that concept that we've talked about. You can't control other people or their emotions. You can do things to try to minimize, like I said, if the person feels they're being targeted or teased, you might be able to do something. But when it comes down to it, you can't, in that moment when they're in that emotional state, you may not be able to fix it right then.
You can give them a channel, you can give them, an alternative, you can give them a way to kind of opt out of it. And I think that's kind of what we're saying here too, as an option.
So the next question that we've got here is from @NerdySlav on Twitter. That's John Paul Haas. And this is: there are two competing emotional states that affect my playstyle. When I'm losing or getting bad draws or generally not playing well, I get frustrated, then I further exacerbate my own mistakes, and then I also start playing much more recklessly. When I'm doing well, however, I often play too safely, so I don't ruin, in quotes, my win-loss ratio during that particular play session. I guess the question here a little bit is, how do you stop that cycle of tilt where when you start to get frustrated, you start playing worse, and then when you start playing worse, you get more frustrated? But then also, at the same time, how do you prevent yourself from withdrawing into yourself during a game when you're winning, when you start playing more safely?
So it's actually a really good question, and one I haven't really fully conquered myself. I mentioned earlier in the show, I hate losing more than I like winning. Like, if you ever see me celebrate a win, I'm not celebrating because I won. I'm celebrating because I didn't lose. Like, that's really what it boils down to. And so I still play, to this day, I still play to not lose. I'm not playing to win. I'm playing because I don't want to lose. So that's a really, I appreciate John for acknowledging that about themselves and identifying those behaviors. For me, and this is just me personally, I lead into it. Like, if I've mulled to 5, we're mulling to 4. Like, we're making bad choices, let's make all the bad choices. And so that's just how I really deal with it. But I think on a serious note, I think it depends on what level you're playing at. So if you're playing just like an F&M where there's not a lot of stakes on the line, really kind of just, again, realign those expectations. Be like, you know what, it's F&M. We're playing for packs. It's fine. Like, just really allow yourself that it's really not that bad. If you are at an event, and what is your goal for the event? Were you looking to top 8? Okay, if you happen to lose this one, can you still top 8? Okay, no. Can you still top 16? Are there still prizes there? Are there prizes that you're interested in? I try to have a backup plan, or I try to have silver lining for when things go wrong, rather than going, oh God, I've lost everything. Can I still get something out of this? Am I still playing for a pro point? Can I still get practice out of this for the next event? Try to feel like you're still taking something away from the experience other than I've screwed up and I've just lost. Are you having a really sweet dinner with your friends afterwards? You're getting steak after this. Who cares if you go 5 and 4? I try to. That happened to me a couple weeks ago. I played in a vintage challenge and I went 3 and 3, and I was like, you know what? I lost last round, but I still get to see Crazy Rich Asians, so I'm still winning here. So I try to find just things to take away from the match other than I've lost or I've made some mistakes, and that way the backup plan or the silver lining makes it not feel so bad.
I haven't played in a ton of GPs, but I used to live close enough to Vegas, and I also have made Vegas the every other year kind of plan for Vegas to be my goal. And I have had the goal of always wanting to day 2 a GP. And the first 2 were sealed. I prepared for them a ton, and I ended up going 6 and 3 at both of them. But back when that did not make day 2. So it was very difficult for me because, like Erin said, most of my friends had all dropped out earlier, didn't care about the main event. They all went to Vegas and they went out and did stuff. I played till 9-10 o'clock at night on those 2 days and did not get to do anything fun, really. So my next Vegas, which it helped that it was Legacy, I still wanted to make day 2, but I went in with a lot more calm attitude. I was there to have fun. It was my bachelor party. On top of it was going to be there, I had planned stuff to do after day 1. I had friends to hang out with, people to do. I got there a day early and went and did
Is
side
Chuck E.
events.
Cheese open that late?
But what's funny about this is I literally went to Vegas dressed in a shirt that said Hobbs Q, and on the back it was a bowling shirt designed for me by Steve Raphael that said Storm Count. It had a bowling ball
Bless your heart.
with all the artwork from like Infernal Tutor, Dark Ritual. I'm literally walking around advertising that I am playing Storm in a Legacy
Wow.
JP. And I went 7-2 and made day 2. I went in with a different attitude based on the goal that I have and the fun that I wanted to have. Speaking a little bit to this question of that frustration and what to do, this is where I really wanted to get into kind of talking about the importance of being able to label emotions. We talked earlier in last cast about the fact that when I teach emotions, and then I'm so excited, and I'm standing in my living room right now like I'm a front of a class of people or something, because this is my favorite. I love in my job is I love teaching groups where I really get to teach about emotions. I love teaching social skills. I love teaching people how to express their emotions, how to cope with their emotions, but even, and I said this last time, identify what their emotions are. So you may have noticed that when I was talking about emotions, I was trying to avoid categories like sad, angry, happy, because those reduce emotions down into categories that are actually very rich and make a huge difference. So I do a lot of anger management groups too. And we talk in there about the fact that anger is not a single emotion. Most people think that they experience it as going from 0 to 60. They go from I'm doing really well to explosion. And as John was saying here, he talked about noticing when he gets frustrated. Well, that's actually a pretty low level of intensity. Irritation, frustration, those though means he starts playing recklessly. He starts playing bad. That frustration now is not just frustration. Now it's getting to be anger. And now it's getting to be pissed off, resentment, murderous.
Been there.
Yeah. Anger has such a variation in it. And he mentions here the frustration. So the importance of being able to label emotions along spectrums. We talk a lot in this cast about spectrums and things existing on not as dichotomies. And emotions are important that way because what I need to do to intervene for myself if I'm feeling rageful is very different than if I'm feeling frustrated. And I think that the first step for what John's question is the fact that you're recognizing and learning what your signs are that you're at that emotional level. Paying attention to your body, paying attention to the physical things that you're feeling, the thoughts that are going through your head is going to be your first step to be able to then, do I need to take a step away from the table, tell judges if you're at a big event that I need to go to the bathroom, take that break, take a second to just do your deep breathing, which is something that you can do in any environment. It's once you recognize that you're doing that, you have to try to do something to change it. And at the Magic table, your options are a little bit more limited. You can't go out and go for like a 3-mile run in the middle of a match if you're starting to feel really pissed off. You can do things like deep breathing. You can do things like trying to challenge your thinking a little bit. We have notepads that we take scores on, writing down what your thought is and looking at it and saying, is this rational? Is it not? Starting to be able to recognize that is a huge thing. And on the win-loss ratio, when it comes to when you start playing well, I think it's being able to recognize pride, recognize the fact that you're doing a good job. Let that kind of guide your decisions. If you think that you're playing too safe, you can work on loosening up by trying out a different thing. But I would say that if you're playing well, you're probably doing something well, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree.
The next question comes from @McGurginatorZX. So we'll go with Mac. The question is, I play with a couple people who get really upset at the slightest provocation, and when that happens, the game becomes profoundly unfun. Is there any way I can help them tilt out less often or severely?
So I think this is a really good question, and as I mentioned earlier in the show, a lot of times it has nothing to do with the other person. And so I, being a tilter myself, when I'm in a competitive event and somebody tilts on me, I let them feel the feelings. Like, I know that it has nothing to do with me. They're probably upset about things they've done, and especially playing the deck that I play. Like, I knew when I signed up for Dredge that a lot of people didn't like Dredge, and that people sometimes just hate losing to Dredge. And so I'm certainly not trying to excuse, their behavior or apologize for it, but by telling yourself that it really has nothing to do with you, it can really free yourself up from those feelings of oh God, what have I done, or oh God, this feels awful. I let them feel the feelings. Like, I will sign the slip, I say thank you for the games, and I let them have their feelings. I really don't know what else to do other than I mean, I guess it depends on like what competitive level you're talking about. When you say you play with a couple people, is this during play testing, is this during EDH? I think it might depend on like what you're playing with them in. But typically, if I'm at a competitive event, I just let them feel the feelings. I know it ain't got nothing to do with me. I sign my slip and I move on. And if that's something you're not able to do, then just again, getting out of there as quickly as you can. If you're not feeling like you're able to really kind of listen to it, again, just get out of there. You're under no obligation to stay and chat with somebody after an event. If you are at a competitive event and it's during play, like the game isn't over with, you can call a judge. Like, that is something you need to be like, judge, my opponent's just not dealing with this very well. And that is something that if they do go too far, a judge can intervene on and possibly even give out some sort of penalties for. So again, it just depends on the setting of where you're playing.
Yeah, and I've actually run into opponents like this at FNM occasionally too, which isn't nearly as high level as GP, but it's not nearly as casual as Kitchen Table Commander, and it can be tough sometimes to sit across from somebody, especially I try to be a pretty empathetic person, and I've been in those spots where, having played Infect right after certain big cards in there were banned, I kept running my head against other people's walls, basically. Like, I just kept running into a wall. And so, I've had those moments, though, where somebody, I'll notice them shuffling their cards back up, or, putting everything away, and I'll just say, hey, by the way, your play of such and such was a really smart move, and, or I'll say something like, I happened to draw really lucky in that game, I drew really hot, or something like that. And I don't know that that's always the right move. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is best to just let them have their feelings and let them process it in whatever way that makes sense. But I have found, I think, that being a gracious winner can also help in that situation. If you say, hey, I really appreciate the way that you played hard, you played well, or whatever it is, that I think can be a nice nod to them as a competitor in the same way.
We've been talking about the setting and the situation, and we've hit on a couple of them with the higher level competitive, the FNM. I want to talk a little bit about if this is happening in your local play group, especially if he says a couple of people, that it maybe is in his local play group. I would say that if you have a local play group and this is the situation, being able to talk to them, not in the moment, but in between games or in between sessions, is being very assertive, as we've talked about before. So we've hit a little bit on this. I wanted to just briefly mention kind of different communication styles. And so there's the passive, the assertive, and the aggressive. And we talked a lot about the Midwest stereotype of the passive kind of, I'm just going to hold it in. I'm just not going to let other people see my emotions because that's not right. You don't want them to know. And you either, develop ulcers, or you end up yelling at people or then exploding on them, which is how the Midwest gets that kind of passive aggressive, because then you're just sarcastic at times because you're never actually dealing with the situation. So the aggressive would just be telling them, stop tilting or I'm not going to play with you. I don't have fun when we do that. The key being, with aggressive, all you care about is your needs getting met. It doesn't even have to be angry. Then that's why I talked a little bit before we started the show that passive communication is actually the one most associated with anger, because you're trying to stuff all these emotions in and you're internalizing and you're turning them towards yourself, which can lead to either an outward expression of anger or depression, or that kind of getting guilt. Well, aggressiveness doesn't have to be angry. It's just caring about your needs and your emotions. So you may use hostility, but it doesn't have to be angry.
Yeah, I agree.
So if we can learn a little bit, with friends, it's assertiveness, which is it telling them what their behavior, what you've noticed. And the key thing that I would tell people to do when you're doing this, assertiveness is kind of cool because this is the first time when you talk about communication that your goal is actually to use an emotion word in your statements. Like, I actually write out scripts. I felt blank when blank happened. What I would like to see happen in the future is blank. It doesn't have to be that formal, but it can be when you're learning it. The key thing is you're not using that you language. You've been doing this. You've been causing our games to be this way, blah, blah, blah. It's I've been feeling, or I've noticed that, and you focus on the person's behavior. It looks like when we're playing Commander that at times, it's just even being honest about, like, I noticed that when we played last week, when this happened, it really seemed to bother.
So our next question comes to us from two people. Two similar questions were asked. This is Zach, I'm going to pronounce it the German way, Leubner. That's at Zach Schwab, at Zach_Schwab on Twitter. And then Will Jordan at Tuba1060. They both asked, how do I stop from being tilted? I think if you call back to your first episode in the psychographic discussion, it's a very relevant question. And Will asks a similar thing. What can you do to get off tilt once you recognize it?
Oof, those are good questions. I still struggle with that, obviously. I think for me, it just comes down to kind of taking myself out of the equation, where it's like, so I try to boil it down to what can I help, because this is a game of variance. And so, if I had to mulligan to 0 and couldn't find a bazaar, there was literally nothing I could do there. And so I feel like we tend to beat ourselves up over things we can't help, where, if your opponent finds that one copy of Grafdigger's Cage and they play it on turn 1, what can you do? There's literally nothing you can do. Like, yeah, you can board in 4 Nature's Claims and hope to God you find it, but sometimes you just don't find it. And so just being able to free myself from those constraints has really helped me, of being able to look at the situation and say, is there anything I really could have done here, or did they just have it? Burn is a deck that I hate. I hate playing Burn. I hate a lot of Burn players. I just, I hate losing to Burn, but sometimes Burn just has it. And so there was a while there where, I'd board in the 3 Knot of the Bones and I'd put up a really good fight. And that's not to say that I don't try, but sometimes it's just Burn. Sometimes Burn has it. And yeah, you played your collective brutality. Yeah, you did what you needed to do, but it's Burn. What can you do? And so just being able to free yourself from those constraints of just saying, sometimes the deck just does what it came to do. Sometimes you did everything you could have done. You boarded incorrectly, or maybe you didn't board incorrectly, but identifying the things that you could have actually helped and made a difference in, and then also just identifying when they just have it, and it's just variance. And variance sometimes swings in your favor, and sometimes it doesn't. And just being able to identify the difference between the two has really been big for me. Of just knowing when to throw up your hands and be like, what can you do? Like, they just had it,
And I think that this gets into kind of this question of what we can and can't control is actually probably my biggest suggestion for how to work on tilt if it's something that happens to you. Going along with what you said, Erin, like paying attention to why you lost or did they have it, I think it's important, and I got this said to me by a judge friend early on when I was playing in San Diego, which was you also need to look at the games that you won, and I don't think people do enough of that. So they get tilted when they lose. I think they could potentially more, because they're not realizing that when they win, they may still be making mistakes. And in order to get better, you need to know when you played a game, it doesn't matter that you won. How did you win?
Yeah, I've also found vocalizing my puns has been really good, where I will, I'll be like, oh, I meant to play a land this turn, and then I'll write that down, and I'll be like, forgot to play a land, or it's like, oh, I should have dredged loam this turn. I write that down, and so a lot of times I will say it in a very neutral tone. I don't say it in any sort of upset tone or anything, but just being able to catch it when it happens, and then when I do feel like if I have lost, when I do start to feel that those bad feelings of, or just those feelings of, oh God, I lost, this feels terrible. Go ahead and look at that pad and be like, yeah, I discarded to a conflagrate that wasn't there. I didn't fetch this thing. Like, yeah. And just being able to really look at that and kind of put it in perspective, where it's like, did they draw things they needed to? Yeah, but I also did 6 things I shouldn't have done either. And that really helps out.
And I think, although this is tough this might not be exactly the answer to the question. But a lot of what I play is Commander, and I play decks that I build mostly for flavor reasons. I build them for, to be really weird things that, don't really work. Like, I have a deck that I'm dreaming up where it makes all of my opponents make decisions. I think there are no decisions in there for me. It's just make my opponents make decisions. And that could go really well. That could go really poorly, but I'm going to have an experience one way or another. Something's going to happen. And I think realizing too, that element of why do you play what you're playing is part of it. For me, EDH is about just doing weird stuff. I'm very much, it's a Timmy, right? Yeah. I like having the experience. I'm very much a Timmy when it comes to the psychographic profiles. I want something weird to happen. I
talked to Zach a little bit. Him and I had been messaging back and forth about this. He mentioned this idea of it's important to realize why we play games. At the heart of it, we want to have fun. I want to have fun. And I don't think of fun as a zero-sum game. I don't think of Magic as a zero-sum game, even though I know that at the competitive levels, that's really what it is seen as. If I'm having fun, I want to have all the fun, which means I'm winning. But the key comes to tilt doesn't just happen. And Erin's touched on this a little bit. Tilt is not just about play. It's not just about making mistakes. People can get tilted because they sit down and they're playing a Dredge player and they've had a horrible experience and they hate playing against Dredge. Or they get really tilted because somebody drops Graveyard hate on them.
Never.
Or
I have no idea how to try about.
So it's thinking about the idea that it's not really... Tilt has different aspects to it. We've been talking a lot about it and we've tried to hit on the different elements, competitive, casual, how it happens. I think it's recognizing why we play the game and how we play the game.
Yeah, there's a misconception that tilt is always explosive anger, but tilt can be simply as the kids like to say when you get shook, when you're like, I'm shook. Yeah, that can be a thing where like, you're I know for me, I was at SCG Indy a couple months ago. I was 4-1. I was feeling really good about myself. And then a single digit table. I'm expecting, Affinity, bring it. Tron, bring it. Yeah, I'm ready. You know what I got to play against? I played against Red, White, Nor, and the Wary. And I was just like, whoa, you're 4-1, right? Like this is the 4-1 area? You're right. How are you playing this? I don't know what this is. I was shook. I was totally shook. Like I wasn't mad, but I was just completely thrown off my game. I went into it with this expectation that I was going to be facing a certain kind of deck. And I went into it with this guy who loved his random brew. He happened to be doing really well with it. And I had no idea how to deal with him. It wasn't in my sideboard guide. It wasn't something I prepared for. And I was shook. I was shaken. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know, I felt like I didn't know how to play my deck. And so Tilt can sometimes process as just being shook, where you're like, I don't know what's going on here.
So I was realizing I had put on here just like something less serious because I knew that our topic was going to be serious. Do we want to do another outro type fun question?
How about we go around the table and say everyone's favorite graveyard hate sideboard card?
Oh,
Are you serious?
And why?
Oh God. I officially deny knowing all of you.
Mine is Leyline of the Void, so that you can't have a graveyard, but I can.
Okay.
I actually don't mind Leyline. I wouldn't mind. I don't mind facing Leylines, because at least with Leylines, because the decks that play Leyline, you typically know which decks play Leyline, and at least you know what you're going to get. The hardest part about fighting Graveyard Hate is because there's just so much out there, you never know what to prepare for. But there are just some decks where it's like, a Leyline's coming, cool. I know what to bring. This is fine.
So, Erin, are you saying that Leyline is your favorite, or do you have a different one that you would?
If I wouldn't say it's my favorite, I have been known to run Leylines myself, but
right.
No,
okay.
I wouldn't say. So if there's a hierarchy of like Graveyard Hate I care about versus like, it's tricky.
She's getting very political about this too. Notice the careful word selection. I wouldn't say favorite.
Yeah. This is an interesting. This is like Erin being bridled. She's kind of like,
and not in a good way.
Appropriate.
See, I don't really play formats with sideboards. I just play Commander.
Good man. But wait a minute. Are you the guy who plays Leyline in Commander?
No.
To be fair, I think people underplay Graveyard Hate in Commander.
Yeah, no.
I've heard that before, actually. Someone else was saying that on Twitter, too.
I guess I would have to say Bajuka Bog, because I play a lot of land-centric decks, and that's a great toolbox.
Did I ever tell you about the time I saw this cute guy streaming, and so there was this cute guy streaming lands one day, and I didn't know what he was playing, and I just saw the thumbnail and I was like, oh hey, cute guy streaming, let's see what he's playing. And the minute I tune in, he's like Wasteland Bazaar, and then the person bazaars in response, and then he plays a bog, and I was like, nope, close out the window.
I saw that.
Nope. Some people don't want to date smokers. Some people don't want hair on the back. I don't want someone who does that. Just that's my picker. So
Maybe here's a question that we can go out on that is a little more fun for you. Manaless Dredge, super awesome or crazy awesome?
So when I first started playing Dredge, I used to look at Manaless as sort of like, you know, the single person at a wedding, you make them sit at the kids' table. I used to think kind of, I didn't really have a great opinion of it, but I've actually started playing Manaless Dredge within the past year. I do think it's quite strong in certain metagames, particularly in Legacy. If Legacy is going to be a format of wastelands and counter spells, and you're not casting spells or playing lands, it's a great way to sort of play around that. So I've actually gained a lot more respect for Manaless Dredge. I've putzed around with it myself in different metagames. I do think it's quite fun now with a field full of blue decks. And so, the only real graveyard hate that people are running in Legacy is it's either 4 ley lines or 4 surgicals. That's really all people are doing right now because of Reanimator. And so, surgical really doesn't matter much to Manaless because Manaless is so explosive, or it can be, and you're running Street Race anyways. And so I have a lot of respect for Manaless. I don't feel quite competent myself with it, but I've come a long way than when I first started, whereas before I wouldn't even consider it. And now I think it's very respectable.
I was going to say, if we go scrub her Twitter feed, I can find us some tweets about Manaless Dredge that are
But I actually really like it now. And
maybe
I think
not
certain metagames
able to be posted in the show notes or in the description of this episode.
I've come a long way. It shows all about growth. I have grown, and I respect Manaless now. So.
I don't think we could top that. I think we're done for the day with that. Erin is right. She is much better at transitioning than we are.
That's our show. You can find Erin Campbell on Twitter at Original Estrus. That's Original OESTRUS. And you can find her on her own podcast, the Magic Mike's Podcast. That's at Magic MICS Cast on Twitter. The show can be found on Twitter at Goblin Lore Pod, or you can email us any questions, comments, or concerns at goblinlorepodcast@gmail.com. Joe Redeman can be found on Twitter at Findhorn, that's FYND Horn. Hobbs Q can be found at Hobbs Q, and Alex Newman can be found at Alexander New M. Goblin Lore is a member of the Geek Therapy Network. Geek Therapy celebrates how geek culture can save the world through podcasts, videos, blog posts, community outreach, education, and convention appearances. It's a network of like-minded creators who believe that all different facets of nerd culture are important to understanding how our minds and communities work. Check them out at geektherapy.com or at geektherapy on Twitter. Thank you all for listening, and remember, goblins, like snowflakes, are only dangerous in numbers.